Namaste, everybody. Lisa A. Romano here, the Breakthrough Life Coach. And today I want to talk about something that has recently really been on my mind. And I want to talk about the energetic grid. I want to talk about the grid that surrounds planet Earth, that we have the ability and the potential to tap into, the unity grid, or what some call the Christ consciousness grid, and how this unity grid that's sort of like, like I said, just encapsulates planet Earth, how we can connect to it and help, become part of the major shift that's happening on planet Earth. And what and how codependency and narcissistic abuse syndrome, how emotional neglect, how childhood programming, how addictions, how all sorts of self-sabotaging disease processes, that are mental, emotional, psychological, spiritual, and eventually become physical manifestations of what I think are lack energies and dark energies, how all of this, taps into or is associated with this unity consciousness and this unity grid. So I could have never known that being raised by two abused adult children of alcoholics who were unrecovered, and how growing up with bizarre coping skills and feeling so dark and living with depression and being suicidal by the age of 12, going through phases of all sorts of like eating disorders and hair pulling, obsessive counting, like you name it, love addiction by the time I was 7, like fantasizing about being rescued by some boy, but 8, 9, 10, 11, I was always fantasizing about being rescued. It was the way I escaped the tension in my home, the anxiety, the fear, the self-doubt, the angst of not being connected to the self. When you don't feel connected to the self, you don't feel anchored, right? And we are energetic beings, and we're supposed to feel anchored to Mother Earth. And when our connections to our own mothers and fathers have gone awry, then that connection gets corrupted, and that's not our fault. And as a result of that, there is great tension in our energetic beings, great tension in our psyches, great tension in our spirits. And we have to learn how to deal with these tensions and disorders, they call them disorders, I just think they're symptoms, but when we become obsessive compulsive, when we become love addicts, when we become codependent, we are trying to find ways to deal with this disconnect, and not just the disconnect, but the static and the tension that is created from the very fragile connections that we have, or the lack of connections around us. I could have never known that being born into that type of an arena would have given birth to a career, 6 best-selling books, 3 programs, at least 1 membership site. I'm not plugging my stuff. I'm just saying that I could have never imagined that all of that pain would have brought me to a place where I was able to turn it into something beautiful or effective or healing. Never, never, never. So here I am, at this stage of my life, and I'm just trying to figure out, how does everything that we go through in life that seems to be negative, what is the purpose of this stuff that was thrown at us? What is it? And I feel in my heart that the whole purpose is for us to learn how to overcome the shadow self, or to heal the shadow self, or to embrace the shadow self with the light that is within us, right? So the whole purpose is really to be able to migrate or transcend to a higher state of a consciousness that allows us the ability to connect to the light that is within each and every single one of us, although many of us are still seeking that light outside of us, right? The truth of the matter is we are all connected to higher self. We are all have a connection to higher self, but that connection can be blocked. That bridge to higher self can be cluttered. Cluttered with what? Fear, anger, self-doubt, depression. And that's Alice, by the way, making a bunch of noise. Alice, relax. Anyway, so we have a bridge to higher self, right? There is this magnificent highway to higher self, but it is cluttered. And when we have a very limited linear view of ourselves and we are identifying with our pain, then we lose the ability to observe the pain, and that's when we get stuck, and that's when we spiral into abysses, literal abysses within our own selves. So here is higher self, but negative childhood experiences, childhood programming, narcissistic abuse. And what's the purpose of narcissistic abuse anyway? What happens when we have been narcissistically abused is we doubt our reality. That is the whole purpose, right? So we're dealing with somebody who is completely shame-based, and this shame is so toxic that their psyche has developed an ability to shield themselves from being able to consciously connect and come in contact with that shame with what could be considered like these steel walls. So imagine that there's this shame in the center of this circle, and there's this huge thick steel wall that is guarding the shame. And the whole purpose, for a narcissist's existence is to prevent the conscious contact with that shame. So what they have to do then is that they have to always stay on guard and find ways to deflect from the toxic shame within them. That is why narcissists need victims. It's like a cat that needs a mouse to play with or a ball of yarn. Because if they don't have a narcissistic supply, they go into fear, they go into shame, they go into rage, because they cannot deal with the self, or their very limited perception of the self, right? So their entire psyche is built upon this idea that they have to deflect and they have to defend. And what better way to do that than to make everybody else absolutely wrong and to justify their attacks and whatever else that they're doing, is because they cannot come in contact with that shame. It's just too overwhelming, right? But when we are being narcissistically abused, by parents, by siblings, by boyfriends, by wives, whatever, our friends, what's happening is they're trying their best to make us doubt our reality, right? And what does that do to us as a narcissistic abuse victim? That creates self-doubt. I think self-doubt is akin to darkness. Now, if I can get kicked out, of my own light, and I can get kicked out into the darkness, then I am not in conscious contact with Christ consciousness. I cannot snap into the grid or the unity grid, right? And maybe that's the whole purpose of darkness versus light. Maybe there are dark forces on this planet. They're doing what they can to scramble our connections to this Christ consciousness grid. Maybe that's the whole purpose. I don't know. But it could be, right? So here we are. We are becoming aware that there's this energetic grid, that there are changes happening in our solar system with our sun. There absolutely are. And you can do your own research. You can go to the NASA websites and learn about solar flares and what's really going on in our environment right here, right now. And everything that happens in our solar system is happening in us. Every cell of our being acts like a tiny little vortex and solar system. And so we have to understand that what's happening outside of us is happening inside of us. And what we want to do is we want to raise our vibration so high that we're resonating with a compassionate heart. We're resonating with one love. We're resonating at such a high frequency that, darkness is no longer able to separate us from the self, from others, or from this energetic grid. So being codependent implies that we have low self-esteem. We lack an identity. We have grown up feeling abandoned and rejected and abused, and we go into fight mode or flight, right? We run away. We fawn. We cater to people please, in a way to make this person who's angry at us not angry at us. We freeze. We numb out. We don't know how to process. We dissociate, right? So when we're codependent, we have developed ways of being that are, they're not healthy, but they've helped us survive, right? What would have happened to many of us if we didn't become codependent, if we didn't have bizarre coping skills? We have found ways to adapt to our environments that were painful, and there is absolutely no shame in that. People who have felt loved and have felt connected to or snapped into a healthy mother or father or caretaker, generally don't suffer from codependency, right? So there is no shame in being someone who's codependent, who lacks a sense of self, and who doesn't really know how to love the self, and who is seeking validation outside of the self, and who is willing to be in relationships that are not fulfilling, who are willing to be in relationships that are all about this other person because we lack a sense of self. So as codependents, our job is to learn how to snap into this energetic grid, right, outside of us. But in order to do that, we have to first learn to connect to the heart space within us. So that means we have to do our work. We have to confront the belief systems because we're psychological. We're not just vibrational, you know? Spiritual work has to include psychological work, right? Because we have to appreciate that we have been wired, right, to not see the self. And it's also proven that human beings are wired to see the glass as half empty because we are wired for survival, right? But what we're trying to do is we're trying to evolve consciously. So we've got to find ways to calm down our amygdala. We've got to find ways to live with compassion for not just ourselves, but for all beings. We have to decide to look at the world through the eyes of compassion. Otherwise, we're not going to survive. We'll stay stuck. We'll stay angry. Our chakra systems will block. We won't be able to flow love and abundance into our families, into our children, into our businesses, into our careers, onto the planet, to our animals, and to Gaia, right? So the goal really is for human beings to live with a compassionate heart. So before we can help anyone else, right, in terms of being narcissistic abuse survivors, in terms of being children of alcoholics or narcissists or sexual abuse survivors, whatever, people who have suffered from addiction and, don't believe that they have any self-worth, who suffer from self-doubt, the whole purpose is to overcome these self-limiting ideas so that we can connect with the Christ consciousness within us, so that we can connect with the divine heart within us. And once we find that amazing connection, that psychological, emotional, spiritual, and vibrational connection within us, once we can know that we can connect to the higher self within us, and we can heal these negative thought forms that have been programmed into us, and it's a journey, it doesn't happen overnight, right? We learn through repetition, observation, and consistency, and that's the way we unlearn. So anybody that gives you this idea that you can heal from narcissistic abuse or sexual abuse or codependency like that isn't giving you the right information. You might have an aha moment or two, but these ideas have to be reinforced over and over and over. And that's one of the reasons that with the work that I do, I combine them with meditations, because I understand the value of having information, given to us in various forms. It just increases our chances of mapping the brain properly versus improperly. So as we heal from narcissistic abuse and codependency and alike, I think it will help, I know it's helping me, understand that it's much bigger than we think. When we're approaching narcissistic abuse from the ego or from a linear perspective, we think very small. We think it's this narcissist or that experience or this experience, where on a global level, it's really a battle between light and dark. It's really a battle between fear and love. It comes down to having the ability to tap into something that is beautiful and amazing and can help heal our planet and raise the frequencies and help evolve mankind's consciousness forward or not. And anytime that we give into a fear, anytime we give into a victim mentality, then in that moment, it's like we're pinching ourselves off from our potential to snap into something absolutely amazing and wonderful. That is your birthright to experience, which is living with a compassionate heart. When you live with a compassionate heart, things just start to happen for you. Life becomes serendipitous. You experience serendipity. Experiences begin to be transformed. Conversations with your children transform. Your children transform. The energy in your house transforms. Suddenly you're hitting green lights instead of red lights, Miracles seem to happen. What's really happening is It's you lining up with this amazing, abundant life force energy that is there and is just waiting for humanity to experience it and tap into it. So it's our job as victims of narcissistic abuse and victims of emotional neglect. It's our job to understand that a victim mentality is going to keep us stuck. And so although we have been victims, we have to pin the tail on the donkey, absolutely. But we also can never forget that the goal is not to stay in a state of hypervigilance, because that keeps us stuck and that pinches us off from this amazing grid, this compassionate Christ consciousness and unity consciousness that we can all experience. So the goal is to absolutely heal, go through the processes and go through the emotions that you have to go through, like anger, because anger is valid, but know that the goal is not to get stuck there. Allow the anger to come up. If you're a victim of sexual abuse, if you're a victim of narcissistic abuse, if you've attracted people in your life who have, abused you in some way, being angry about it as you begin to understand the process of it is normal. But we also have to remember that the goal is not to get stuck there, that the goal is to shift, and to transmute. What helps me, because I'm a very analytical thinker, thank God, is this idea that I'm able to understand why I'm shifting. And I'm shifting because I want to be able to connect more deeply to the light that is within me, to my essence, and I want to be able to experience compassion so that I can live in the flow and I can also help other people live in the flow. I have children. I don't want them getting stuck in self-doubt and fear and angst and guilt and shame. I don't want them to have eating disorders and counting disorders and, anxiety disorders. I don't want that. I want their chakra systems to be unblocked. I want them to be able to figure out what they can control versus what they can't control quickly, and then to know that their job is to choose love over fear every time, right? So forgiveness is a big part of this. It starts with us forgiving ourselves, us forgiving this idea that we are both conscious and unconscious at the same time. I've met people who are pissed off that they're born unconscious and that they had unconscious parents, and that all of these things have happened and they've been stuck in cycles of recreation and repeating their patterns. I know people who are pissed off. Some of them, my family members, like they're pissed off, and I'm like, okay, I get it. And you have every right to be pissed off. But if you get stuck there, you're pinching yourself off from the ability to experience this amazing, compassionate way of living and this Christ consciousness. And so we can't get stuck. We cannot get stuck. Dear ones, if you have suffered from narcissistic abuse, my heart goes out to you. It's not your fault. If you experience sexual abuse, oh my Lord, that is not your fault. That is something that happened to you. And along with that, what happens is, in most cases, there is great shame. When we wake up and we realize that we've been narcissistically abused, some of us are like, oh my God, how could I let that happen, right? Oh my God, when we wake up from sexual abuse, we're like, oh my God, I have all this shame associated to being sexually abused. Those of us who have had eating disorders, so oftentimes eating disorders are done in secret and we feel ashamed. Those of us that self-harm, we're ashamed. Those of us that are addicted to porn, we're ashamed. Those of us that are having affairs, we're ashamed. Many of us are. And so we've got to heal the shame, right? We've got to look at our experiences from a compassionate place and understand that none of this was our fault. And that the consequence of shame was a consequence of darkness. It's a consequence of unconsciousness. But when we understand that we are the light, when we understand that in spite of whatever's happened to us, there is this bridge. There is this rainbow bridge within us that we can learn to see more clearly, and we can learn to navigate, connect to, and will allow us to connect more deeply with the light that is within us. Now, the energy that helps us get there is not a dark energy, it's a light energy. It's love, it's compassion, it's understanding, it's empathy, right? And so when we learn to give ourselves compassion, right? When we heal the shame with self-compassion, it was not my fault. I didn't ask for this to happen. It's not my fault my parents were asleep. It's not my fault that, this person broke into my house and abused me, or this neighbor abused me. That's not my fault. I was a child. I was a victim of that. It's not my fault. And this is not my shame. This is not my shame. When we learn to speak to ourselves that way, that is self-compassion. And that is one way we can heal the darkness, and that is shame that is within us. And so as we move closer to a Christ consciousness, and as we begin to understand that we have the ability to tap into this amazing grid that blankets planet Earth, and we have the ability to help heal humanity and move it forward, I think it's really, really exciting that we understand that, being abused, and overcoming that abuse is all part of the plan, perhaps part of the plan. We have the ability to overcome these dark energies. We have the ability to help heal the ego. We can say to the ego, okay, you've been on guard for a long time, and you've been trying to protect the inner child with very limited resources and very limited conscious and cognitive understandings. The ego doesn't understand the light. The ego is just in a fight or flight. That is the ego. The ego is all about defense mechanisms. As you move into a higher state of awareness and you evolve your consciousness, then you realize that you don't need to defend anything. Nothing, because you are enough. Even when people come at you, you are enough. You learn to see people who come at you with a compassionate heart. You understand where they're coming from. But that doesn't mean you got to sleep with them. That doesn't mean you have to invite them over for dinner. That doesn't mean you have to send them a Christmas card or a birthday card. It just means that you understand and that you refuse to join them where they are. You refuse to allow a defense mechanism to elicit your need to go in defense mode. You just don't need to do that. Just come at it with a compassionate heart, and you'll be able to bypass that energy. And you're actually helping the other person by not reacting, because you're not quantifying that energy. So the less reactive we are, the better it is for everyone and everything. Your teenage daughter starts with you, and you just stand there and you're non-reactive, and you just listen, and you open up your heart to her, and I hear you, I understand with you, how can I help you? And you just keep your energy balanced, and you don't meet her energy where it is, right? You stay higher, just hold this space of a higher love and higher compassion. What's happening is her energy will burn out faster. This video is about helping inspire anybody out there who suffered from narcissistic abuse, who feels stuck and powerless. Understand that there is the ability to heal is within you. But what we have to do is understand, when we understand that there is a battle between light and dark, when we understand that any thought form that separates us from the self must be transmuted so that we can become part of the collective, right? The collective of people that are aware of moving humanity forward. When we understand it's an evolution of consciousness, I just think it gives us that little bit of hope that we need, that can help push us when we're feeling down, like we're struggling, like I don't think I can go another day. This just hurts too much. Like I'm surrounded by narcissists. I'm surrounded by the word no. Every time I get going, something else, pops up. Whack-a-mole. Whack-a-mole. You know that game, like whack-a-mole? As things come up to you just look at it and figure out, what do I need to transcend here? And how can seeing this with a compassionate heart help me let go so I don't get stuck at this level, so that whatever's coming at me doesn't pull me down, so that I can continue to snap into this amazing unity grid and experience abundance in my life. Every single one of us has been created so that we can experience abundance. But when we live in lack, when we live in fear, when we live in anger, we can't experience that abundance, right? If we look at our lives and we see abundance, that is evidence that we are sowing energy towards love and compassion. It's beautiful. And the more you take on that opinion, right? The other day, I was walking Alice in a town near our house, and there was this elderly man, and he was obviously struggling with being able to step up on a curb. And Alice is a pretty big dog, and I know that she can be intimidating, but I took the shot anyway. So I went over to this elderly man. I extended my hand. I said, may I help you come up on that curb? It looks like you're struggling a little bit. And he was a little, he was a little awkward with me. He goes, no, I'm okay. I think he was afraid of Alice, actually. But I said, okay, no problem. On the same walk, there was somebody who was in a wheelchair, and he wasn't making his way to the curb, and it's a very, very crowded town. And so as I was walking Alice across the street, I said to him, would you like me to like stop the flow of traffic so you can get by? You know, and he's like, no, I'm going to wait a little bit. I said, okay. And then we had a nice conversation about the dog both times. And the reason I'm sharing this is because, you know, in those two instances, and I'm not patting myself on the back, you guys write me all the time and say you love when I give you analogies. Some people say, oh, she's talking about herself. Whatever. You know, overwhelmingly, the feedback that I get from the YouTube community is, Lisa, I love when you use analogies because then it makes me understand, right? So in both these situations, dear one, what I was doing was I was sowing a seed of compassion. Now, it doesn't matter if the person on the end of that accepts it or not. What matters is that I've sowed that seed of compassion. I didn't know these two people. It doesn't matter. They're my brothers. They're human beings, you know, and I saw an opportunity to extend myself, you know, and say, can I help you in this moment? There's a situation, very simple, where like with Oprah did a series on random acts of kindness. If you can help your brother or sister, right, in a moment, and you can sow a seed of compassion, and you're doing it with the right heart, you expect nothing in return, then you are sowing into this ability and this grid of love and abundance, and that must be returned to you, because as a man sows, so shall he reap, right? So I hope this has inspired you, those of you who feel powerless sometimes and think, you know, am I going to make it? Yes, you're going to make it. And keep looking to live with a compassionate heart, compassion for self first. Connect with this idea that you are connected to infinite intelligence. Don't stop, especially when people try to, you know, weigh you down with gossip, or you're having arguments with the people in your house. Try to stay connected to a compassionate heart. Do what you can to overcome those dark, lower thought forms and those energy forms, and keep moving towards this abundant mind and this abundant mindset. You know, and that will allow you to more be able to open up your heart and connect to this unity consciousness, and this amazing movement towards raising the vibrations of our magnificent planet. Thank you so much for watching, and if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to this YouTube video, and if you want to be notified of the next video, just click the notification bell and you'll be notified when next video goes out. Namaste, dear ones. Please believe that there's a light inside of you. There's a light inside everyone, and our job is to connect more deeply with that light so that we can help evolve consciousness and move it forward and experience abundance in this lifetime. You deserve it. Namaste. Bye for now.